Oops. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Happening. My name is Joel Shaft, and I have got a lot of things up for you today. I've got Matt Hancock and basically everything about that. I've also got Derek Chauvin, and what's happened to him? That's a name that you might not have heard for a while, but he's actually still about, and things are happening there. And then finally of all, I think I'm going to sort of carry you home with the Batley and Spen by-election and the craziness that is happening there. But first, I want to bring up sort of two little quick things, just like little stories. First of all, today I have been vaccinated. Yes, that is right. I'm really sorry to the 9/11 conspiracy theorists who made me shake hands to not take it, which is a true story. I decided I wanted to have the vaccine instead of follow their advice. I also want to say that yesterday I went to a big protest, and I'm suddenly feeling more alive than ever, because even though I'm like the last person you'd think would ever go to a protest, I quite like them actually. You go there, it's a fun day out, wave around a sign. I didn't. I was with a camera and being like, oh, I'm going to be a journalist today and all that. But let's go to the big story. Because at that protest, it had a bunch of names: kill the bill, free the press, all this sort of stuff. But all these people, they all went to Parliament. They took out the stage. He went up there and the dude went and said, Matt Hancock must resign. Why? Well, turns out this week what happened was quite a busy week for Matt Hancock. Let's skip on over to get a taste of what has happened by the Evening Standard, which is Matt Hancock's resignation letter in full. Okay, so we know now a little bit. We know that he's resigned, and we know that, people were calling for him to do so. Here's what the letter had to say to start with. Dear Prime Minister, I am writing to resign as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. We have worked so hard as a country to fight the pandemic. The last thing I would want is for my private life to distract attention from the single-minded focus that is leading us out of the pandemic. Interesting. I want to reiterate my apology for breaking the guidance and apologize to my family and loved ones for putting them through this. I also need to be with my children at this time. There's a couple of more clues in that, isn't there? He's talking about having to apologize with his family and being with his children, but not mentioning the fact that, of course, he has a wife. Well, that's because that's exactly what had happened. This week, there was a video that came out. It was from Matt Hancock during the the first lockdown. I think it was filmed in April and May, some 2020, that sort of time. It was a little video in his office, which, by the way, yes, politicians have videos in their offices. We all learn something new every day. And he was, having a kissing relationship with, a staff or an aide. Now, there's a lot of things you can go with this. I could talk about the fact that I'm finding myself looking at it's like a sex scandal and being incredibly apathetic about it. I'm like, oh my, I could just kind of roll my eyes. It's yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me. It's just as far as I'm concerned, politicians they can put their private parts wherever they want, as long as they're doing a good job. I don't care. But then, in this case, we kind of do care, because he was doing this in contravention to the lockdown rules, which he, as the health secretary, had put in place. He was the one who said, hey, look, people, I know if you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you can't go visit them. You can't, have good sexy times because, there's this deadly pandemic that's going around killing everyone. And, we, the people, were all like, okay, yeah, sure. The deadly pandemic is a terrible thing. We don't want to die. and we don't want people to have all kind of horrible things happen, so we'll follow that. Yet, Matt Hancock seems to think he was exempt from that and went around, meeting up with his girlfriends on the side while the rest of us were banned from doing that. So there is this level of where I feel like I should be really annoyed because he was doing this while the rest of us were not allowed to. It's one thing if the politicians going around, they're having affairs, they're cheating on their wives and girlfriends, but you're like, yeah, but everybody does that. It's quite a different thing though when they're doing that, when they've specifically made laws saying that we can't do that. It's the hypocrisy of it. The hypocrisy of it, though, is made even worse by the fact of who she was. Now, the woman isn't the center of the story. Neither is Matt Hancock's wife. I think Hancock is the main culprit here. But she herself, it turned out, was married to the it was some kind of an executive, some kind of some kind of business guy. I didn't specifically check into this one. I apologize. But he was this business guy who was doing PPE contracts. PPE being the personal protection stuff, the masks, the little visors, all sort of safety gear for doctors to not get infected. And then this guy got a bunch of contracts from the government saying, oh yeah, supply us with masks and gloves and all that stuff in the middle of the pandemic. So the joke that ended up swirling around was that Matt Hancock couldn't even put his private parts without it being a conflict of interest. I really want to. I'm this close to using profane language for this, but I can't because I am a good boy. See the halo? I've got actually a tiny ring. There's the halo. Anyway, so we've learned this. So we've learned already quite a bit. Matt Hancock is resigning. He is resigning because he had an extramarital affair, which I don't particularly care about on that principle, but I do care about it on the fact that he was doing it when he told the rest of us that we couldn't do it. Oh, and we now know that his replacement is going to be Sajid Javid, the ex-chancellor of the Exchequer, and also, the internet's kind of been joking, the man with the strongest supply teacher energy in the world. But there is something else to this. And this is the part that gets to my core, and is actually really actually quite upset about this whole story. I know, right? George is upset at a Tory leaving office. That should be the thing that makes me the most happy. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I'm really upset or anything. But I am disappointed at the fact that he resigned for his least condemnable act. He left out of office, he wrote his sad resignation letter saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to spend time with my family, in this difficult time as I probably go for a divorce. But doing it for just cheating on his wife, which a lot of people do. I know people in my in my just normal everyday who cheat on their spouses. That's just normal. What isn't normal is disastrously handling a pandemic. What isn't normal is going around saying, oh yeah, let's do herd immunity. Let's go around and just let the virus rampage around the country and kill hundreds of thousands of people. 1 in 4 people who were in a social care home in early 2020 is now dead as a direct result of Matt Hancock's decisions. 1 in 4 people in care homes died under his tenure. And it wasn't because he was not being warned, right? Everyone was already saying, even in February, like, we should really pay attention to this pandemic. We should really, start to prepare for this because, like, people are dying in China of this. And they was just going like, da 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 da. And then in March, when the virus started to hit Britain's shores and people were starting to die, and it's like at the end of March, Italy was digging mass graves in Bergamo because so many people were getting COVID-19 and not surviving. And yet Matt Hancock was just kind of in the clouds. He was going around just like, yeah, but we in Britain are going to be okay. We have, what was it? We had like the 5th highest death toll in the world for COVID-19 until like 5 minutes ago, when Brazil and India started to get it quite bad. That's not normal. That is horrendous and awful. And yet, Matt Hancock was kept in charge of health and social care throughout all of that time. He was making the decisions that were all the wrong decisions, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And yet, that's not how he leaves. He doesn't leave because of that accountability. Not elected out of office, not punished for being a disaster. He's punished because he became a joke. Because he decided to break his own lockdown rules and, meet up with his girlfriend, cheating on his wife. Oh, the horror, the scandal. I can't believe how upset his wife must be. And presumably also the husband of the woman he was also, having an affair with. Like, it's, if you will, it's like the decision that affects the fewest people is the one that's had the biggest repercussion on him. Because that doesn't affect anyone. Him going around just like kissing other women in his life, like, I don't care about that. You don't care about that either. That's just like normal. Everybody does that, but he's being made to, but he's resigned because I will say there is one silver lining, apart from the fact that Matt Hancock, who was a bit of a dummy, I'll put it like that, is gone, and that's an inherently joyous, fantastic thing. But it was also really, really entertaining to see Boris Johnson react to this. Boris Johnson is, at this point, I think, famously a serial adulterer. I think the current estimate is he's got like 6 kids, all to 3 different women throughout his life. He even cheated on Carrie Simmons, who's like his current wife, who he only married while he was prime minister. And like Carrie, I don't know what to make of it. Like, she was like, oh, Boris Johnson, like he cheated on me, but like, I'm okay with it. And I'm going to marry him anyway. Again, I'm not that fussed about the personal, private stuff. But it was really entertaining to see Boris Johnson try to, talk about Matt Hancock doing that. Because, you could tell from like his heart of hearts, he wanted to like criticize it. He wanted to do like the good, moral, upstanding prime minister goes like, oh, I can't believe my subordinates. I can't believe my subordinates would do such a thing. I only have like moral, respectable people. But like, he also self-aware enough to know that's like, if I ever said something like that, everyone would criticize me as a hypocrite. So, that said, at the end of the day, there is one extra little facet to this story I just want to add, which is good news. It means that the government now is treating its aides differently. Yes, instead of abusing them like Priti Patel does, having made like 2 of her like top civil servants resign already because of bullying, like a bunch of the lower people are just like getting out of the Home Office because Priti Patel is just like a nasty bully who goes around beating them up. No, Matt Hancock shows the way. Love your subordinates, love your civil servants. That's the way to go. It's a step in the right direction. And it's good to see that for once they're not abusing their staff, just putting their hands down their pants. But what do you think? I know I'm going around being kind of jokey, just like laughing at everyone's expense. But it is a serious story, and there's of course a lot to really add to it, and there's a lot of sort of like Westminster Village implications that I've not really delved into. So what do you think? I'd say call the studio, but you can see from my background, I'm not actually in the studio. I'm at a place called home. I know, horror of horrors. So, but you can still Facebook message. I always make sure to check the Facebook live stream and, check out what people are saying on there. However, in the meantime, and in between time, I want to go and dive straight to the next story. And I'm going to follow the sort of a little guideline I had at the beginning, when I said the way I'm going to put it in order. And that is Derek Chauvin is arrested. No, not arrested, in prison. Okay, so the first thing you might be thinking is, okay, who is Derek Chauvin? All right, do you remember last year? It was kind of a big deal in America. It was called Black Lives Matter. There was like these huge protests, and like there was like burning cities, and there was chaos, and like cops were resigning. It's a whole thing. And then it spread. There are protests maybe here in Britain you might have joined or even taken part in. Waving for Black Lives Matter. And it wasn't just in those two countries either. It was all over the world. There were Black Lives Matter protests in Japan and Korea. There was even one in South Africa, which, I didn't know what to make of that one. And there was all this protest. But yet, what was it for? What was like the catalyst? Well, the catalyst was, of course, everything. There's a lot going on. But the inciting incident that had caused it right then, if you remember, was a man called George Floyd, a black man who lived in Minnesota, which is one of the sort of states of America, being killed by the police and being videoed in it. He's actually killed in a really horrible, cruel way as well. Like the cops kind of like they put him down on the ground and they sort of kneeled on him. One of the cops was putting his knee on George Floyd's neck. And George Floyd's like writhing on the ground going, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And well, then he died. But Derek Chauvin was that cop. He was the police officer who had his knee on top of George Floyd's neck and kept it there and possibly even applied more pressure. In fact, did apply more pressure as the man writhed and died underneath him. Horrendous, monstrous. And all four, like the thing that gets me the most, like I don't know why it gets me so much, but it really just gets me is the fact like they were arresting George Floyd because he had a bad check at a shop. It's like of all the crimes you could think of, like you might be like, if he was like, oh yeah, George Floyd was like, I don't know, some kind of like a murderer and he's like shooting people, like you'd be like a bit more like, yeah, had it coming kind of thing. But like for a check, like mate, I've probably had like bad checks and didn't know it. That's not the death penalty. But it was for George Floyd in Derek Chauvin's eyes. Well, luckily, in an amazing change from like the normal pace of things with the US police, Chauvin is now going to prison. He was sentenced this week to 22 years, 22 and a half years in prison for murder. I can only clap. I can only applaud. In fact, I'll even do it now. Nice little golf clap. Because that's a good thing. That's a good story. Justice was served. The trial itself was sensational across the world. Millions of people were watching proceedings live. To see the blow by blow as everybody was arguing about the case and what happened and how everybody feels about it, and like what the evidence was. Fascinating stuff. There was one really memorable moment that was really caught attention, where Derek Chauvin sort of turned to like George Floyd's family. I was like, tried to give like a kind of like oh woe is me kind of speech, basically like I feel so bad for killing your son, for killing your husband. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. It was just it was one of those cases where you're just like, you almost want to be there, just kind of like put your elbow into him and go like, read the room, read the room. Not now, not that's not what people want to hear. Just don't say anything. You're the bad guy here. Don't make your situation worse. Like you feel like you want to do that because it's just like the sheer cringe and secondhand embarrassment of watching that happen. If he was hoping for like emotional support, please, it didn't work. He almost got like the harshest sentence he could have had, which is good. But why do I keep saying it's good? Well, it's because in America there's been repeated cases of police officers just killing civilians, mostly because it looks like they just have like a bad culture that emphasizes like they have like a power trips of like, yeah, I'm the police officer, I've got like, the gun, and I watch all the cop movies. My job's really super dangerous. Like there's gangs everywhere, and like I'm gonna go into like a shootout at any time. And, like there's bad guys patrolling everywhere. And you're just like, shut up. But all of that attitude translates into real people getting killed, which is horrendous. And then to make it even worse, the departments cover them up and help them out. And there's like, oh yeah, oh you killed someone. Oh that's bad, but we can protect you. We're gonna like one of the ones that's been the most notable is how like a lot of departments they have like cameras on their uniforms. British police have that too, by the way. It's a good thing. But you always know when a killing is like justified or not, because if the cops like release the footage immediately, like oh no, the cops killed someone, and then just like snap, there's the video, and then you're gonna be like, that's when it's like probably okay, because the video will immediately show like, oh yeah, no, like the dude had like an axe and was like chasing the cop or whatever. You're kind of like, okay, fine. But when they're not doing that, when they kind of hide it, then it's like, all right, what really happened? What was actually the story? It turns out it was dude had a bad check, and so therefore we the cops decided to be judge, jury, and executioner and kill him right there on the spot by kneeling on top of his neck. As I said, evil, and he deserves to go to prison for this. Yeah, never say that the happening is not a doom and gloom show, because good things do happen in the world. I think a lot of news stations kind of forget that sometimes good things happen, and this is definitely a good thing. All right, I'm going to go off on a break, but I'll catch you in 3 minutes, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. Link.
again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well. And they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, I'd say to me, you had one to forget.
That's it. That sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, you had one to forget. Get over it. And that was it. So I'd dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid, I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
And we are back. Hello and welcome to The Happening. My name is George Shaft and you are listening to Relaks Radio. Don't forget though that I'm not the only show on Relaks Radio, including that show you saw in the break, which I always find the most aggravating clip they can ever bring out. Because I'm just like, no, wrong. But so if you really want to be aggravated like me, listen to that clip. It is good actually. It is very kind of like, it's very interesting, brings out an extra perspective, but it's a perspective I don't agree with. What I also don't agree with, however, is, the outcomes of some of the things that have been happening this past week. Before I was talking about like Matt Hancock, having to go in circumstances I wasn't really that happy about. But then I followed through by talking about Derek Chauvin, the American police officer who killed George Floyd, justly and deservedly getting himself into prison for, all the crimes of murdering a man in cold blood because he's wearing his police officer's uniform. I want to focus on that just a little bit more. I didn't quite say everything I wanted to say, which was, I've been talking about like Derek Chauvin, and he was an American police officer. And yes, it was right for him to be punished like this. But just because I'm saying, like it was an American police officer and like it's an American situation, like all this stuff, doesn't necessarily mean that like the problem is only there. I want to basically go for a broader point that I've been kind of noticing for a while. But never really had like a good spot to talk about it until today. That is, police forces attract a certain type of person. You notice this. Like, I've noticed, see, I travel a lot. I go to like lots of different countries, go on holiday. Like, even like this past week I went on a holiday, though it was in Britain still. And it's lovely and amazing, and people generally tend to be really chill. But police are always kind of similar. And one of the ways they're similar is this kind of, they have this attitude of just kind of, oh, we're better than everyone. Now, the United States is the worst for this by every metric, as far as in my experience. Like, they swagger around in like literal military vehicles. And then they're all surprised when the people are like, are you sure you're like protecting us? And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, you roll up here in a tank. This is just a burglary. Like, I'm just reporting, like, somebody stole like the tires on my car. You don't need to show up in a tank. So you've just destroyed all my flowers. But like, even those jokes aside, right? And I know I make a lot of jokes, but every country has this. I remember when I lived in South Asia briefly, that the police would do their idea of crowd controls, hitting people with a stick. I remember that in Italy, they with at one point, was it Italy? So somewhere in Europe, like my parents at one point got pulled over on the road by the police, and the police were really aggressive with them, going like, "Oh, how dare you speed on our roads!" Like, and they're just like, "You're don't you know what you've done? Like, you condemned us all, you've doomed us all," and you're just like, what are you doing? Stop this! It's just a speeding ticket. And then in Britain too. I mentioned that I was at a protest yesterday, right? But what I didn't mention was that there were two protests that happened simultaneously, and both actually met up. One of them was the lefties. The term I like to use now is that it was lefty bingo at that one. It's kill the bill, free the press, all sorts of these groups all coming together. Bit disorganized, because it was like, what's the message? But like, they were there, you're all out there for the good day. There was the other group that was actually much more sort of unified, but yet way less wholesome, I'll put it like that, which was the anti-lockdown protests. And when the anti-lockdown protests passed through, the police, to their credit, made a big point of like putting a cordon between the two groups. And it's like, all right, that's fair enough. At the same time, it was concerning, like the fact that there's like loads of cops there, and they were all standing in like a line, doing like that whole shoulder thing, the show of force, and really kind of like pushing this group, these anti-lockdown protesters, like to go elsewhere. And clearly those protesters didn't like it. Like, a bunch of them were just like shouting at the police. There was one guy who approached the cops and shouted like, "Oh, you will all hang for this," which was really scary. Or at least it was really scary until the same guy turned to me, because I was wearing like a mask at the time, and shouted "coward" at my face multiple times, which was really funny. I'd love for that kind of stuff. It was really funny, but there is a broader sort of thing to discuss here in Britain about that. Regularly, the police in Britain are just, the tools of the people in power. Now, for the anti-lockdown protests, they didn't like the fact that the police are acting like on behalf of like the government to enforce like lockdowns. In fact, I even spoke to one guy who was at that protest, who had even been arrested for celebrating a birthday party in the middle of the first lockdown. If you're someone who's like not completely on board with the rules. If you're someone who's like, you have your own sort of thing going, of course you're not going to be friends with the police. And the police are not going to be friends with you. And sometimes I think that the police do cross that line. Not just in America, but also here in Britain too, where they go, yeah, you're doing like a normal thing, that we're going to arrest you and like throw you into prison and all that stuff. You're just like, but why? I don't really have a conclusion here. It's one of those things where it's like it's inevitable, but still not pleasant. So, like, you just kind of complain about it, but there's not really anything that I can see can be really done about it, or at least done in such a way as to, improve people's lives. What do you think? If you've got something to say, message. I always make sure to read the messages, the live chat on, Relaks Radio, and I like to interact and sort of see what you have to say and comment. But speaking of comment, let's go and whistle stop tour to our last story this week, which amazingly, unusually, hasn't actually happened yet. I'm going to go to Sky News for this, just to get like the article to get the ball rolling. It's by Sam Coates. The title is "The Accidental By-Election: How Labour Triggered Another Divisive Vote for the People of Batley and Spen." Okay. Will Keir Starmer face the biggest crisis of his leadership to date if he loses the by-election in the West Yorkshire constituency of Batley and Spen next week? Maybe. Will former Labour MP George Galloway, standing for the Workers' Party, attract enough support from the constituency's large Muslim community, previously loyal to Labour, to deny the incumbent the seat? Potentially. Will the Conservative Party's approach of standing aloof from the slugfest between Labour and George Galloway, while following a local playbook identical to the one that proved successful in Hartlepool, allow them to come through in the middle to victory? Possibly. Or will the personal vote for Labour's candidate, Kim Leadbeater, evident on the streets of Batley, be enough to stem the tide of 2021's by-election shocks? Conceivably. It's a lot of questions thrown out the gate, but there are a lot of very pertinent ones. And while this article continues with its own sort of, idea of where it wants, where things are going to go, I'm going to sort of veer off and sort of explain like a couple of what's been going on. So, Batley and Spen might be ringing a few bells in people's heads, because it was actually the constituency of an MP called Joe Cox. I'll quote the article because it just says it the best way. On the 16th of June 2016, a week before the Brexit referendum, Joe Cox, the Labour MP for Batley and Spen, died after being shot and stabbed multiple times in the constituency town of Birstall. A 53-year-old neo-Nazi gardener, Thomas Alexander Mayer, was found guilty for her murder. The judge said Mayer wanted to advance the cause of white supremacism and said he was a modern-day form of Nazi. It was an incredible tragedy. It was a horrendous act, and one that, in my mind, was made much sadder by the fact that then, just a few days later, Britain then voted for Brexit, which endorsed the politics of the man who murdered Joe Cox. But time doesn't just stay still, as was evident at the referendum. Batley and Spen actually ended up being a majority Leave constituency. Yet, that wasn't addressed by Labour and hasn't been addressed throughout the country. A lot of constituencies supported Brexit, supported doing the leaving of the EU and all the attendant, in my mind, stupidities about that. But that's what they think. And the Labour Party didn't really have anything to say to them, which could have been fine if they'd gone for the Remain side and gone like, oh, actually, you guys were all completely right. But they didn't do that either. So this is another episode, another example of Labour being squeezed and annihilated by indecision and not being able to represent people on like the biggest, frankly, religious at this point question in British politics right now. Bad start. But it didn't just end there. Because Labour won in Batlins-Ben in 2019. Very close. It was like 3,000 votes. But, they won. But then their guy left. She had to, Tracy Brabin, who was the previous Labour MP, had to resign because she became the West Yorkshire mayor, which is good for her, but not so good for the party as a whole, because it meant there had to be a by-election in a seat where their candidate won by a wafer-thin majority already, and where Labour already has a very tragic, dark history. So, oops. Labour now has to defend another seat in the middle of their clearly worst wilderness years in a long time. And then they made things worse, because while their candidate, from everything I've been reading, Kim Leadbeater, who is actually the sister of Jo Cox, seems like a wonderful person, like genuinely just as like, I'm everything about this area, like I'm in like 1,000 different charities and like I help everyone. And, I'm like a great person overall, like genuinely seems like a great person. The Labour Party just kind of waived the rules to rush her through. And it's not the first time that Keir Starmer's Labour has done this. They did that in Hartlepool as well, where they were like, oh yeah, let's, those rules to like, get our candidates? Nah, let's just like throw this person in. They're good, right? Like I had a conversation with them for 5 minutes and they seem to be like a good person, so let's like throw them in. Who cares about the process? In the Labour Party, which is like the party that cares the most about process. And then, to add to this, when they did that, when they put like Kim Leadbeater like forward, they kind of skipped over 2 local candidates that were in the Labour Party who were running. 2 local councillors, in fact. 2 Muslim local councillors. Which is not a great look. Let's be real. Like, it's one thing if they had, the usual process, the usual like nominations, and like the local constituency party like has their debates and their say and their arguments, and then decide collectively, this is the person we want to be our candidate. And let's be real, they probably would have picked Kim anyway. They probably would have gone, yeah, Kim Leadbeater seems like a fantastic person, let's go for her. But doing that process would allay the fears and the, kind of the attitudes of the Muslim community in Britain. Well, a lot to be angry about at the moment, just in general, but also the Labour Party in specific, for really being pretty quiet, pretty silent on 2 recent big incidents of Muslims being killed. The first one, and the more minor one, was Kashmir. If you remember last year in 2020, and in 2019 as well, India decided to assert more control on Kashmir, which is a Muslim majority region in the Himalayas. They cut the internet, they cut utilities, they marched in soldiers through the cities. A lot of people died, and it was evidently oppression. It was oppressive and abusive to the local people there. Britain's Muslims, understandably, were really annoyed at the fact that Muslims in Kashmir were being killed by Hindu nutcases in army uniforms. And yet the Labour Party didn't really have much to say about it. They just kind of went like, oh, they kind of like played it really like, oh, there's like both sides to this, because like we want to take care, we want to have like, Hindu votes as well as Muslim votes. So, I don't know what's the right side. Maybe like the people who are being oppressed and being murdered in the streets, maybe they did something bad. Who knows? And then the more recent one, and the bigger one, and the one that keeps coming up more and more, has been Palestine. It's just been a few weeks ago where Israel attacked Gaza again. It felt like it was almost like they looked at the clock and like, oh my God, look at the time. It's kill Gaza time. And they came in with their jets and their tanks and their soldiers, and they killed hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza. They destroyed the Al Jazeera building, which was like one of the main media centers in the whole city of Gaza. Horrendous, evil, without a doubt. And it was, once again, Muslims being killed by, an outside force for no good reason, really. And yet, what's Keir Starmer's Labour Party done? Yes, sure, you can point to some individual MPs going out there and going, oh yeah, this was, that was kind of bad, wasn't it? I really thought about it. Thought like, innocent people, like civilians being killed by jets is actually bad. Who'd have thought it? But the main leadership had the thought of like, but gosh, in 2019, we really suffered because everybody thought like we hated the Jews. Like there was that whole anti-Semitism scandal. So, let's not say too much on Israel. Which, now those chickens coming into roost, welcome to politics. The Muslim community, which is over 20% of the electorate in Batley and Spen constituency, not very happy about that. The silence at their own fellow co-religionists being murdered. And like normally that wouldn't be like too big a deal, except that this time around in Batley and Spen, they have a champion. George Galloway used to be a Labour MP. Then, when he was disgraced, converted to Islam and has ever since been very, very vocal, very, very strong on Muslim issues. He's running. And sure, his second party in 2 years, the Scotsman who lives in London, is not a convincing force, but he speaks for Muslims. Weird as that sounds. He is going on there and he's talking constantly about, Palestine. That was really bad. We should maybe have a stronger stance and punish Israel for that. He's going around and saying, like, the oppression is bad. We should be respecting religious freedoms more. We should be making a point so that our Muslim people here in Britain don't feel like they're being abused, which they often are. So you can't really blame people for finding that a seductive message and going like, yeah, that's how I vibe. That's how I'm going to go for. The result, well, we'll see the result next week. But for now, it's turning out to look pretty ugly. Pretty stupid in some ways too. There was a big story that happened this week, and the thing that convinced me to do this at all was Kim Leadbeater got pursued by a mob who was shouting abuse at her for supporting gay rights and trans rights, which I'm not okay with that. I think that gay people and trans people should have rights. I know, shocking. Somebody call the presses. George has a radical opinion, but that's the people who were shouting abuse at Kim Leadbeater were like, oh, how dare you support these rights? And the thing that kind of really cemented it more was that it was pretty obvious that like the mob was not people from that area. They were people who were coming from the outside, from other places in Britain, all collecting together into the by-election, to support their candidate, George Galloway, and then shout abuses at Kim Leadbeater because she has a pretty standard left-wing position on civil rights in the UK. As I said, I don't know how this election is going to turn out. The latest polls suggest that the Conservative Party, who have decided to opt for the well-tried and true tested tactic of standing very still and hoping nobody sees you, hope that they're ahead at the moment, which is not what I like to see, and it's also very unusual. Amazing, the party which is, and if they do win, the Tories, it will be a very remarkable by-election. Already, earlier this year, there was a by-election in Hartlepool, which the Tories won. And that was the second time in 50 years that the party in government has won, like a seriously contested by-election. Or even just a by-election at all, I don't remember. Which is remarkable. And if they do this again, if they do it a third time in 50 years, that's serious. That is genuinely really serious. It throws all the questions out of what is the Labour Party doing? Who are they talking to? What is their message? Because at the moment, the general consensus seems to be it doesn't talk about anything to anyone. It focuses on what are the focus groups saying, and what can we say to make the right-wing newspapers who already hate us, maybe try and hate us slightly less, and it's not working. And if in Batley and Spen, Labour loses again, then our lives are going to be affected by the Conservative Party making all the rules for at least 10 more years. And I'm not okay with that. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section of this Facebook live stream, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you put up on there, answer any responses you have. You have been listening to The Happening, talking about all the things that have been happening this past week on, only on Relaks Radio, available on Facebook and on the Relaks Radio website itself. Great places with lots of great shows, which I highly recommend. I would tell you to call the studio, but I wouldn't bother right now because I'm actually going to be heading off now, and I will hope to see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.